Hey guys, Mr. Sonnenberg here. Today we're going to be talking about a food web. So we're piggybacking off what we previously in the previous screencast talked about, which was food chains, which is a series of how energy moves through the biosphere, basically talking about what eats what through the ranks of from producers to primary consumers to secondary consumers, tertiary, quaternary if need be, and up to apex consumers as well, with the ones that do not get eaten, and talking about how the rule of 10 and how we transfer energy throughout the biosphere and how energy moves from the various trophic levels from level 1 and up. So today's food webs is much more complex than that of a food chain. It's a series of food chains put together, but it sometimes gets somewhat complicated as we move through it, because what happens is we can't really peg who, say, the primary consumer is or who the secondary is. In all cases, we can't label them with such a title, because in various food chains in amongst the food web, what we can get is these species might change based on their order. So basically what a food web is, though, it's basically a diagram, and it's going to show the energy pathway or the flow of energy in a community. So the first thing we need to talk about are producers, and producers are what are making the food. They're taking the sun's energy, they're storing it, and they're supplying the food for all the consumers. Now, any consumer can be known as an organism that eats other organisms. So we'll learn that there are some organisms that eat producers, there's some that eat consumers, and some that eat both. So the first level consumer that we talk about is the herbivore, which Herbie is talking about plants, and they are actually going to eat producers. We move on then to carnivores, and carnivores are your meat eaters. Okay, so carne meaning meat, they're going to eat other consumers. And then we have omnivores. Now, omnivores are going to eat both producers and consumers. So if they want to eat these producers or plants, they can do so. If they want to eat meat, they can do so as well. So they don't choose, they eat both. So us, humans, we would be known as omnivores. There are cases where people are vegetarians, which I'm not, because I like meat, steak, and I like chicken. And so anyways, I'm not going to tell you my life story and all my likes and dislikes. I'll save that for some rainy day. But anyways, we eat both vegetables and we can eat meat as well. And then what we have are decomposers or detritivores. And basically what they do is they eat dead organic matter and then they recycle nutrients, because inside organisms and inside matter we have a collection of, could be things like calcium, magnesium, and all these nutrients, these organic and inorganic. So the carbon and such, the organic, and then the inorganic being, say, the calcium, magnesium. All of these nutrients need to be replenished back into the biosphere and into the soil. Now what happens is these decomposers are going to break it down and recycle the matter so that it can be used for the producers. And then we have kind of a cycle, because without producers and gaining these nutrients, we wouldn't be able to survive. So they're key. And without the sun, we wouldn't be able to survive either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a picture of a food web. So what we see here is that it's a typical desert food chain. You can see on the left hand side here. Okay, so you can see this typical food chain right here. I'll just circle it for you, or I'll draw an egg or a potato, whatever you want to say that thing is. Okay, maybe more like a potato, I guess. But anyways, so we basically have our producer, okay, which is going to be right here. Okay, then we have our primary consumer. Now notice in this food web that the arrows are pointing away. Well, that is the direction of energy. So the mouse is going to consume the plant and the energy is going to move in this direction. As if we were to draw, which we'll get into, ecological pyramids, you're going to see that energy flow is always increasing. So energy will never decrease. And if it does, we have some problems. Because if there's not enough energy at the bottom, there's not going to be any energy at the top. So then we move into our secondary consumer right here, the snake, who is going to eat the mouse. Notice the arrows are going the other way because we're talking about flow of energy. And then we have the hawk that is going to eat the snake. So the hawk is going to be the tertiary consumer, or we could say in this particular food chain it's going to be our apex consumer because nothing is eating it at this point. Now what we do is we take this food chain and we actually can move it over here. So I'll draw, I'd say I'm going to circle it, but I'm just going to put a crazy outline. Oh, my drawing skills are terrible. I apologize. Anyways, I don't know what that looks like, but it is outlining the food web. So in this food web, we have a series of complex food chains. Now, like I said, you can't necessarily say who the primary consumers are going to be here because you're going to notice that it's different than a food chain. It doesn't just run in a straight line, but sometimes there's species that are consuming multiple things. Like right here, for example. Okay, right here, what we see is we see 1, 2, 3 species consuming that producer. Also right here we see 1, 2 species consuming this producer. So now that food chain is going to look much different because we can sub in and out, and sometimes the food web can become, or the food chain can become quite long, but there's not a lot of energy if we choose that path consistently. So luckily what we have is we have a lot of not necessarily specialist species, but we have a lot of generalist species. And so what happens with those generalists is they can consume many different things, many different organisms, so we don't get complete competition over one species, because that's sometimes how we get extinctions in endangered species and such. But a food web is very complex because multiple species that sometimes can feed off one another, so there's this relationship between them. But in this relationship, we can still create a series of food chains, and it's basically the same principle that we are passing up energy to the next trophic level, and so on and so forth. And we have our producers and consumers, primary. This is where we can see the herbivores. Herbivores are going to feed on these producers in this picture. Then our our secondary consumers are going to feed on our primary consumers, our herbivores. And then our tertiary are going to feed, and then we get into our carnivores and so on. And then there are omnivores that eat both as well. So anyways, this is food webs. They're quite complex. It's important we understand that the arrows are referring to direction of energy, and that we can't peg a species as a primary consumer or secondary consumer, for example, because it might change based on the particular food chain that it's a part of within the food web. So anyways, that's food webs. Hopefully this helps, and if you have any questions, please bring them to class. And I guess we'll see you on the next screencast talking about ecological pyramids. Thanks, guys. Bye.